just to be respectful of everyone's time. I know people kind of jump on throughout the time, but if you're just hopping on, so everyone knows, we will be recording this, so we will be sending it out. And I'll go ahead and start us off. My name is Megan Elwood. I am the Business Development Manager with Strategies Group. And what I'm going to do is I am first really just going to welcome everybody today to part 2 of what will be a 5-series episode, if you will, for our construction webinar that we're doing in partnership with the American Subcontractors Association. So today we will be covering basically how to maximize your construction profitability. And I'm not going to steal too much of Pat's thunder, but before we introduce Pat, I am going to throw it over to Vernon Thomas. He's the director of the American Subcontractors Association. And we have been partnering with him throughout this entire thing, really just to reach as many people as we can. And Vernon has been a wonderful partner of ours. So I'll let Vernon introduce himself and a little bit about ASA, and then we'll get started.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Again, I'm Vernon Thomas. I'm the executive director for the American Subcontractors Association, the Georgia chapter. We are an organization that deals strictly with issues that affect the subcontractors here in the state of Georgia. And, obviously, if you have any questions about what our organization does, I will put my information in the group chat. And, we can go to our website or, like I said, give me a call or shoot me an email if you'd like more information. And I really would like to thank the folks from the Strategies Group. We got Selena, Pat, Megan, what y'all are doing here, especially with COVID. It makes it difficult to bring in, quality presentations. So we really do appreciate what you put up here. And again, we look forward to the information, and we look forward to some of the future programs that you're all going to bring to us. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vernon. So now, without further ado, I will introduce Pat Chappell. He is our speaker today. So Pat, upon graduating from Clemson in 1975, he started his career in real estate and construction as well. He founded actually the Strategies Group in 1984. So he's been in the business for a while. He was one of the first Timberline, now Sage partners, additional partnership with Dexter and Cheney, Viewpoint, Acumatica. Strategies Group, we've assisted over 2,000 construction-focused companies, and our goal is to help them find solutions, really to help them significantly increase their bottom lines and ultimately build equity within their business. So just a short little introduction. I will throw it over to Pat Chappell to get us started. I can assure you he is an incredible speaker and very fun to listen to. So y'all sit back and enjoy, and feel free to throw any questions in the inbox that you have. Like I said, this is free Q&A, so if you think of anything, throw it out and we will answer at the end of it.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Vernon, and the rest of the team today. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Pat Chappell, and thanks for putting all that pressure on me about being a great speaker. I don't know if that's the case. My wife and family tell me that I talk too much, so you're going to get a dose of that today. Hopefully it doesn't ruin your lunch, but we do appreciate you joining. This is the second part of a 5-part series, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so we're basically just going to cover what you see on this slide today. We will talk about it in depth. Hopefully I'll introduce you to some new and interesting concepts and also some tools, because we are contractors, and obviously you need to have the right tools to do the job. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. As Megan said, I've done this for a while now. I can't believe I'm coming up on my 40th year of doing this. And we've really been blessed to have so many customers become part of our family. They are in various parts of the construction business. All those you can see there on the left. And now more and more, because of COVID and because of the way the technology has changed, and the way we need to build things has changed, we're becoming much more involved in solutions for the construction supply chain. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. It kind of goes to efficiency and quality and building methods and things of that nature. We do have, I think we're actually up to 20 employees now. And we have our main headquarters in Atlanta, but we also have satellite offices in Charleston, South Carolina, and Portland, Oregon. So kind of an interesting fact, believe it or not, The oldest ongoing business enterprise in the world is a Japanese company called Kongo Gumi. They started about 1400 years ago. And it's kind of interesting that a construction company is the oldest company doing continuous business in history. But what's really interesting about that history is the issues that Kongo Gumi faced 1400 years ago are still the same issues that we face today. And so what I mean by that is we need to find work that's profitable, and we need to get that work. And we talked about that in our first webinar for ASA. So we will speak to some of those issues again because it's so integral to the whole process. Today we're going to focus on making more on the work that you get. And we'll talk about what are the methodologies we can use, what tools can we employ to kind of help with that. We also know that high on the list is, and recently, right before COVID, finding people and keeping them, the best people we can has always been a problem. And it's particularly a problem as people of my age sort of cycle out of the workforce. So we've got to figure out how to find new people, how to keep them. A lot of the people that are coming into the space now expect tools that are modern tools. So we need to talk about that. That'll be another session, as well as reducing risk. And I kind of look at risk in 4 buckets: that the government puts on us, that we have internally, that we have at the project level, and yes, your personnel represent a risk to you as well. So we'll talk about that in another session, as well as how we can reduce overhead and develop and maintain great client relationships. As we all know, it's better to keep a client if they're a good one than it is to find a new one. It costs a lot more money. It causes a lot less hassle for you when you're doing shortlisted work, or you're the only contractor on a design build job, or you're on a negotiated job as opposed to hard bid. But we'll talk about that as well. And then if we're still interested at the end of the day, we can talk about how to create some ongoing revenue streams. This is particularly something we see repeatedly in the specialty market, where you can install something but then have a life cycle of recurring revenue from from working on that equipment that you've installed. So these are all valid strategies. Again, the only thing that really impacts what these sort of 6 or 7 items are is how good is the economy. So back in 2012, we weren't too busy trying to find people. We were trying to find work. Now we're trying to find work and we're trying to find people. So in other words, that deck of cards is shuffled based on how the economy is doing. So this is just kind of a scary thing to me, though. The hard truth, even at this day and age, in all the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've talked to in my career, even now, over 30% of the companies that we deal with work on projects that don't have a repeatable process. So, if this is you, I highly encourage you to figure out how to do that. And we can talk about that, but I think that it's a combination of best practices, standard operating procedures, and then maybe the right tools that reinforce that. So one of the biggest things that's changed in my career, back in the day when we were teaching people how to use a computer, I was joking with the ladies earlier. I actually had somebody call me one day and tell me that their cup holder was broken on their computer. And I was going, your cup holder, what are you talking about? Well, that thing where I push and it opens the door and the cup holder pops out. And I said, oh, you mean the CD-ROM drive? Oh, okay, now I know what you're talking about. That's one of the things that's changed the most. Now we have people walking around with a computer on their pocket that's connected to the internet, no matter where they are, and they're using a database product that allows that information to be collected on any device from any location, and have that information be a resource that helps us be much more proactive in running our business. So how do we get there? Why are we still there? So what are the challenges even before COVID? Well, hey, what we do, it's not easy. Schedules are difficult to keep up with. Everybody always wants it yesterday. Sometimes resources and cash, they're hard to come by. So, that's one of the things that's made it difficult. Another is, and I think that sometimes we subscribe to this theory too often in the construction business that every job is a work of art. Maybe it is. I mean, every job does have its own environmental, site-specific, governmental issues, but construction methodologies, performance metrics and things like that, they're really not that much different. The site makes them different. If you think every job is totally different, then you might need to look at your processes and your people, because, you know, if you don't know how to build something that you can repeat, that you can scale and you can measure on every job, that when you go to sell that business, or when you want to turn it over to your employees or your family for a revenue stream, if you can't do that, if you can't make a hamburger, then you can't, your company is worth pennies on the dollar. So all the work that you've done to build that business and to build equity in your company, if 70% of that value walks out the door when you quit, retire, or whatever, then that's a problem. So we need to look at how we can systematically build out processes that, you know, that really help replicate this process that we do, measure it, and scale it if we want to grow. Maybe we just want to make more on the work that we're getting already, which is valid, but maybe we also want to grow and make more money too. So those are things that you all have to decide and where it's important, but regardless of where you do it, you need to have a system. Obviously, you need to understand your costs. So I think typically we find that underperforming contractors are fuzzy in that understanding. They usually get the job part. They might understand the overhead and some of the general administrative expenses, but too often I see these just lumped into a big number, and at the end of the year, the CPA allocates those costs back to the job as a percentage, instead of you really understanding what the costs are. That makes it really difficult. If it's just an allocation instead of something that's being tracked for a variance, then you can't fix it because the job's already over. And that's another issue, kind of the whole no track to run on. Even if you do have some standard procedures, maybe they're not based on best practices anymore. And certainly we talk about that a lot. The new tools have allowed something as simple as an invoice that's processed the old way, came in the door, somebody in accounting stamped it, stuck it in the project manager's folder on their desk, it went out in their truck, they got lost. Now, with new systems, we can electronically capture that. It can get recorded to the job immediately. It can be distributed to the project manager for approval, no matter where they are. If it's a big enough invoice, it can be, you know, approved by somebody else in the organization. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about in building things around best practices, but also reinforcing them. If there are procedures because of old tools, maybe they take too much people power. And we're also seeing more and more manual or electronic, even Excel spreadsheets are electronic. But you know, you're having to go out to another piece of software to do something, and maybe that's because your legacy system is difficult to use or doesn't have that required functionality. We're going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about job forecasting here in a few minutes. Obviously, poor communication between the field and the office. So kind of like the whole allocation of cost after the fact that I illustrated a second ago, we're also talking about poor communication between the field and the office. I mean, a lot of times we find out something before, you know, the cat's already out of the bag. So it's too late to go back and fix something. And poor communication is 99 times out of 100 the culprit. And then finally, you know, and what makes this difficult to do, not impossible, but difficult, is even those project managers or people in your company that have adopted technology for their own use, most of the time that software doesn't talk to each other. So believe it or not, still the average project manager has 8 different apps on their phone. They've gone out and bought them. I mean, there are actually software companies out there that use a strategy that allow you to download their app on the computer or your phone and start using it. And then all of a sudden the CFO and the company finds out that he's got 8 guys that are using this software and it's not talking. And now it's kind of a Trojan horse for that vendor to come in and say, well, hey, we can turn on these 8 guys and it's only going to cost you $20 a month. I don't really like that strategy, but the idea is that people are adopting technology to help them do their job. But if those don't talk to each other and you don't control it, then you've got at best baling wire and bubble gum situation. So what we want to talk about more is, how do we get there from here and what is the blueprint for it? Well, I've kind of broken it down into two major phases of construction. So one is obviously pre-construction, which we've talked a lot about in our previous webinar on how to find and retain good business. So in the pre-construction phase, we need to define our ideal job. Then we need to go find that work. And then what we want to do is we want to estimate it for profit. We're going to talk about that in a minute because there's a difference between estimating and estimating for profit. If you don't know it's one thing to know your cost, but if you're not estimating for your cost and an individual profit component at the smallest level of detail that you can possibly measure and still handle it. I mean, if it's too detailed and it's taking you 10 times longer to manage, then it's not a good system. But there's a balance between, at what level of detail do I really need to be tracking my profit as a separate component in addition to the cost? So we'll talk about that and something called profit velocity in just a minute. Then we also have our construction and post-construction phases, and this is where we really start doing the work. We've got what we perceive to be a good contract. Now we need to plan that work. We need to perform and monitor the work. We need to analyze it while it's in flight. And guess what? We need to rinse and repeat. So the whole idea here is if we can build a track to run on, so to speak, for what looks like a best practices model that's going to look to generating the maximum level of profitability, that's what we're trying to do. So how do we do this? And I am going to steal a little bit from the last webinar because I think it's probably the most important thing you're going to do. You really need to define your ideal job. What is that? And the way that you do that, or at least one of the ways to do it, is to try to take at least 3 projects that you've done, you feel were successful, and you need to do a really detailed postmortem. If you're not doing a postmortem on your jobs, you're losing a huge opportunity to improve your company, your processes, your people, and the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. So some of the questions that we want to ask: how did we secure this work? How did we get it in the first place? Was it a bid job? Did the owner come back to me and want to do a design build? Did we use a service? Did we generate our own leads from some type of CRM activity? How did we secure the work? So if we know how we secured it and the path of least resistance gets us to that same kind of ideal job, then we want to do that. We want to do it again. Do I want to work with the person that, was the CM or the owner? I mean, there's what's the polite word, a poop to income ratio, I guess, for the types of projects that we do. I mean, you might have made money on it, but did you get an ulcer over it? I mean, at what point is that really valuable? So we want to look at, does it make sense for me to want to work with this person again? Now we get into the nitty gritty. What were our direct or actual costs? Okay, now I'm talking about, and most people do a pretty good job of this, but they don't do it soon enough, but they usually catch up. The problem with accounting is it's usually a scoreboard of what you were doing. It doesn't tell you something right away. It tells you what happened 30 days ago for most construction companies who are cycling their month-end closes. So I'm really only getting really accurate data maybe once every 30 days. Most new systems will allow you to get that every day, older systems every week. So we really want to look at what our direct costs are. What we don't know usually are what are indirects, and that's what I was speaking of earlier, where we might have a piece, maybe we don't attract equipment on a job, we just cost the operation of that equipment to a big bucket during the year, and then the CPA allocates that cost back to my jobs. So I've got to come up with some kind of percentage to anticipate, but when that gets applied in a more global fashion, then there's really no way to figure out what the real costs are for that equipment. That's just one example. We really need to know those indirect costs. We also need to know what kind of general and administrative expenses we have. How are we costing the power bill from the office to the jobs? Do I even do that? Or is that just another bucket? So what I'm trying to get to here is what are the costs at the job level And those indirect costs really are a piece of that. So why not be tracking that while you're doing the job, so you know where you stand overall? That way we can determine our gross and net margins. So, those are really important numbers. Your bank wants to know that information. Your bonding company wants to know that information. Your employees, if you're an open book company, want to know that information. Those are all the kinds of things that are important, for running the company from a financial standpoint. Where do we underspend or overspend against our estimate, and why? So, did we really have a windfall somewhere? And if we did, why? Or did we overspend in a location where we typically make money? Again, going back to this post-mortem of our job, these are the kinds of things to understand so we can avoid them, or we can replicate them if they're positive. Same thing on issues where we had some bottlenecks, and what was their impact from a time frame? What are the lessons learned? And what was better than expected? Why was it? And how can we repeat it? So those are all the kinds of things that we look at when we're trying to come up with our ideal job. And I think they're all important. I probably left some out. Some are more important than others, but I really encourage you to do this, because you're going to learn a lot about your company and your people and the kinds of work that you probably should be performing. Okay. After you find your ideal job and you've established what it looks like, where am I going to get more of them? Again, kind of back to the first session, we'll get into the management of ongoing jobs too. But again, go back and look at existing clients and shortlisted or negotiated opportunities. Those are almost always easier and have higher margin than a bid job. Visit with other potential customers that kind of fit that ideal job. Maybe you're into multifamily, maybe you like medical, whatever those things are that really seem to shine for your company, that you have a passion for, that your people really rise to the occasion. Those are the kinds of jobs that you're going to look at, and those are where other potential customers may live. Of course, you can use other tools like Construct Connect, Construction Market Daily. Dodge has been around forever. If you're more focused on bid work, then these are great sources. And the nice thing, and the reason I brought these up now, is Construct Connect has built an additional series of filters that really allows you to take what your ideal job looks like and use it to help you drill down on opportunities that look much more like what your ideal job might be. So, there's even places on that particular service where you have negotiated work or short bid list, private work, stuff like that. If you're government, to go to BidNet and a couple of the other places. Maybe you've got a business development, like we have Megan on staff to do BD work. It's certainly hugely valuable, those relationships that you establish. Usually it's the owner or the project management team who has those relationships. And, when somebody leaves your business, that project manager that's helped you get 7 jobs out of the last 10 that you have, and those people go with them. So you better have, some way to replicate the process of getting that new work. It's the lifeblood of your business. And then there are tools that you can use. There are several construction-focused construction relationship or customer relationship management tools, Salesforce automation tools. We never used to talk about this 20 years ago. We talk about it a lot now. People say, well, how can CRM really work for my company, Pat? What are the things that we can do to foster, relationships with existing customers and get new business? And it's really interesting to see things like, as you all know, if you've done work with a customer before and they bring you back in, and now you're doing something design build and they bring you in early, maybe the chances for you to close that work go up. So if you're going to look forward over the next rolling 12 months of where your work's going to come from, what your volume's going to be, what your profitability might look like, then being able to look at that work early, even before it's awarded, can then become potentially part of your forecast. So if you know that you've got a $20 million job coming up with somebody you worked with before, maybe that's not a bid job for the same amount comes in with a 10% chance you're going to get it, let's say. But that pre-negotiated work, that might enter your pipeline at 40% because you've worked with them before. As it gets higher and higher involvement, more levels, now you're going from a conceptual estimate to a 50% estimate or a 75% estimate. As you get closer and closer to that final bid number, the visibility of that job can become part of your pipeline. So these are all things that I think are important. They're overlooked or they're not understood. So we can talk about that again. But at the end of the day, I don't care about any of the stuff that I've talked about. If you don't estimate it right and bid it for profit, it doesn't matter how good anything is, because you can go out of business winning lots of work that doesn't generate any revenue or any profit. Or, well, I should say you're always going to generate revenue, you're just not going to generate profit. So that wise old subcontractor or that wise old successful contractor said a mouthful. So it's really, I can't understate the value of doing your estimating correctly. But once we get that job, now I want to talk about a concept that maybe you've heard of. You'll intuit most of it yourselves, I'm sure. You probably already thought about it, but Hal McComber, who's a kind of an industry expert on revenue for job forecasting and has done some things with a product called Touch Plan, has coined a term called profit velocity. And what profit velocity is really, what do I think the margin, the profit margin for this job is based on the time it's going to take me to do that work? Why should you care about that? So let's look at a scenario. So we've got a scenario here where we have two jobs to choose from, but we only have the resources to do one. And we have general conditions that are going to run about $40,000 a month. So which one of those jobs would you select? And what Hal's done is he's given you this profit velocity number, which basically says, well, would I take the $250,000 profit job over 18 months or 200,000 over 10? So, I mean, immediately we go to the big number, but then we look that we've got a job there that has 8 months longer to complete. So the profit velocity number for the bigger job is around 14,000. The profit velocity for the smaller job is $20,000. And that $20,000 job might have some additional benefits. Maybe I don't have to have as experienced a group of team members. Maybe I don't have to have as many of my own forces labor to do that job. There are an unlimited number of possibilities, but in his world, you know, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You might want to go back as your post-mortem and look at profit velocity and see what the numbers turn up. But he believes that by increasing your profit velocity, you just can't help but be more profitable. So that makes sense to me, and it makes sense to other people that I've talked about. And as you can imagine, in my career, I've probably talked to a couple thousand contractors, and we've talked about this in some form or fashion on multiple occasions. Where it gets even better is if I take that same thing and I add one additional criteria that I complete that job 6 weeks earlier. Now what happens? So on the job that's smaller, on a $200,000 profit, now my profit velocity has moved up to $23,530 or 20, yes. I have also done what? I've saved 6 weeks of general conditions. Now, maybe my general conditions are high, it doesn't matter. You can still do the percentages. But in this particular scenario, I had $200,000 profit that I thought I'd get over 10 months. If I cut 6 weeks out of it, I'm also cutting 6 weeks of general conditions out of that. So now I have $260,000 of profit over 8.5 months instead of $200,000 over 10. And I've increased my profit velocity on this job by $10,000 a month. So again, you can make the numbers talk any way you want. The point here is to illustrate that by not doing a whole lot of crazy things, you can really figure out a way to evaluate your jobs before you do them And when you do that and you come up with a profit velocity number or some other determining number, you then have a way to manage and plan to that job. And Hal always says, you know, if you complete jobs ahead of schedule, you're going to increase your profit velocity. That leads to greater profitability. So how do I do that, right? How can I complete projects ahead of schedule? Well, again, there's any number of things, but first of all, you better know what your costs are. Again, kind of going back to the post-mortem that we discussed a few minutes ago. You need to set profitability goals, not just costs, but profitability, again, at the detail level, whatever it is that you think you can do. And you need to measure those goals along and along, right? You need to align early with everybody else on the project. Why? I have heard thousands of horror stories about I needed to go out and get X, Y, and Z done, and subcontractor 2 was on the job site. Or the city closed off, you know, the egress to the job site that afternoon. Or you can come up with any number. I'm sure you have your own stories and could tell 100 of them about why not working and being properly aligned with everybody else on the job site is really a problem. And it's really kind of a cornerstone of lean construction, which is a whole nother conversation, but it's really kind of in the same vein that, you know, you get people together, you meet early and often, you align with everybody, you help each other out on the job. You don't say, I'm doing this job in a vacuum. You look for ways to improve your productivity and standardize your processes, which will then increase your efficiency, waste reduction. You need to look at your labor waste and your material. Labor waste is a whole nother subject. So, you know, how have I planned? Do people have to walk too far to get their materials? Are they blocked from the, you know, from the job because somebody else is there or some other condition? All these are things you can plan for and aspire to accomplishing. Something we're seeing a ton more. It's especially prevalent in the subcontractor and specialty contractor world, where more and more people are using space for offsite construction. And I've actually seen a couple of companies who didn't have the space contract with somebody who did to have components like ductwork and other things that are made offsite that can then be delivered to the site. So you've got all the value of prefab, pre-assembly. You're not a slave to the weather. You don't have to deal with other people's logistics on your job site. You know, you can deliver things just in time. Not everything has to be stick built. So we're talking about or field installed or field assembled. You can do a lot of this, you know, offsite, and you can look at ways to actually foster that. Quality will go up, efficiency goes up. And then of course you can use software and other technologies like sensors, site capture tools, drones, GPS devices, you name it. There are tons of tools out there, but the key to those tools is to get that data in real time. And that's really where the new solutions come to play. Most of them, the brand new ones, not the legacy ones so much, although they're trying to catch up. They're not the same as real time, where I can take a picture of an expense report or expense receipt on my phone, have the computer code it to the vendor, enter the dollar amount, and if I've done it on this job before, enter the job number and the cost code from me just taking a picture in the field and having it automatically appear in my back office. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about now. And that's just a product of the smartphone, you know, the internet, and those relational databases. And while you're at it, we're trying to make this a learning experience. We need to learn from each job, and we need to benchmark that progress to see where we are improving and how we can foster additional improvement. All right, I am going to actually show you some software in a minute, so bear with me. There's just a couple of other things I want to talk about. I think we've seen this movie before. Not having good, detailed and well-articulated plans and schedules are really, they cause a problem. You're upside down. So one of the things that I seriously think you should do, and most companies do it, but I think sometimes it's a lick and a promise. But whoever estimates the job, if it's an estimator, you really need to have a deep dive on an estimating to production handoff. The field team needs to understand what construction methods the estimator was thinking about, why he made certain decisions about certain areas or sections of the job, what construction materials was he thinking about, what productivity factors. I mean, all that needs to be there so that the field team can actually execute according to that plan, especially since profit should be a component of each piece. You need to do execution planning at the work breakdown structure level. And I don't care what that is to you, if it's a cost code, if you call it a location. I mean, you need to plan down to the WBS level, including schedules and resource management. And I'm going to differentiate between those two tools now. In my way of thinking, and it might be wrong-headed, but it seems to be fairly accepted, scheduling tools are mostly around CPM. So basically, that's where you see your Microsoft projects, stuff like Labor Chart, Power Project, P6. All those tools are really about, their primary focus is to do critical path scheduling. They may have resource planning, but mostly they are focused on scheduling along a critical path to get to that, that construction, to that COE, that certificate of occupancy for the owner or the building owner. Resources planning tools are more about tools, equipment, and people. So there are different tools out there for that. You've probably seen Smartsheet. There's a tool called Bridget. These are more around, okay, I know I've got to meet this milestone, but what are the resources that I have to do that? And, I mean, we know if the estimator planned on having 2 crews, hanging conduit, and all of a sudden you get busy and one of those crews is gone, now you have a resource planning issue. A resource planning tool could help you if you're looking at your work holistically across all jobs to mitigate those kinds of problems that are going to cost you money at the end of the job. We also feel like it's really important to do leapfrog planning, whatever you want to call that. This is a formalized, meeting, maybe every other week, maybe weekly's too often, but every other week where we say, well, what's going wrong? What's going right? And this is different from forecasting. This is more around the labor piece. But, what do we need to do? I mean, we're behind on our painting, or we're behind on our, exterior skin, our curtain walls behind. What are we going to do? Can we pull a crew? So we want to talk about that and creating and updating stretch goals, because these are the goals that go to the idea of bringing that job in ahead of schedule. Because every day that you do that, every day saved adds to your bottom line. So what are we going to do? How do we do these things? What tools are available for us? So I'm basically going to take you into some software very quickly. Oops, sorry. And what I want to do is let's focus a little bit early on in managing risk with better compliance tracking. Risk is certainly part of the jobs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a tool from Viewpoint called Spectrum. Some of you may be on this tool. And what you're seeing here is actually a project manager's dashboard. And so I have various items on this dashboard: my jobs, my billing, what's my cash flow look like, what invoices do I have to approve that have come in from accounts payable, whatever the case may be. Over here, I've got my compliance log. And all these are red because I'm behind on it. As you notice, as I hover over this, the Blackbaud corporate headquarters has 11 overdue compliance items. I only have 1 on Linwood Center. I have 13 on Talbot Professional. So these are visual cues to let me know that I need to do some more work. So I'm gonna click on that red graph, and as I drill down into that job, I now have a list of all of the compliance items. So I've got some conditional lien releases. I see expiration dates on insurance certificates. These are all the things that allow me to stay ahead of issues around compliance. a lot of systems don't do compliance at all. So customers or clients are forced to keep up with them on paper or keep up with them in Excel, and they don't talk to the job. Maybe you have to have one person in your company at a huge expense just to keep up with compliance tracking. And that could be more than insurance certifications. It could be, hey, I need to reprice with this particular supplier every 6 months. I notice his prices creep up. So I need to have a sit down with that company every 6 months. Or I need to know something before it's going to happen. I don't want to wait until the day it expires and I'm trying to pay the bill that the system is, telling me I can't pay the bill because the guy doesn't have a general liability certificate. So that's one way of looking at it. In another tool on a different kind of desktop, I have a different kind of view. Now I have an expiring compliance that is, and by the way, Megan, I'm sorry to bother you all, but can you see my screens right now? It looks like my share might have stopped.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, good. Okay, so here I have a list of all my compliance, but I've told it, I want you to tell me 30 days in advance of this to happen. So now you're starting to see how a real-time solution can actually help you be proactive and not just a scoreboard of what happened. What good is it for me to know that the certificate expired yesterday when I could have known a month ahead of time that I needed to contact my sub or my supplier or my customer, and I need to get that compliance item, which I could email directly to them, have them update their certificate and send it back. So that is just an example between, what one tool looks like, what another tool looks like, but they basically have the same, functionality. This one's a little bit older. This one's a little bit newer. Let's jump back into and look at the weekly resource and cost forecasting. We recommend that you have job forecasting meetings as often as you possibly can, because what you need to do is you need to be prepared. You need to know when those variances are happening, and you need to be prepared in advance wherever you can. So for example, maybe I want to go back into this tool and I want to go look at a cost projections. So in this particular tool, I am on my first revision that ended on January 20, end of 21, so last month. What I want to do now is I really want to look at, and hopefully it didn't time out on me. If it did, I'll have to refresh the screen. So forgive me if it does. So no, I want to work on my second month's projection. So down here at the bottom, you'll notice that I have my job cost codes. So I'm actually acting as a mechanical contractor in this particular case. I can see my budgeted quantities, my costs, where I actually am in my labor, in my material, in my actual costs. I can actually see what my projections are. And if I wanted to, I could come in and I could override any of those numbers. So this is typically most people tell me it's a monthly process. I would certainly encourage you to do it at least twice a month or 4 times a month, because the excuse of having to prepare all this information and get it out to our project managers and meet with my senior project manager, my owner, and then talk about where I really think I'm going to be in this job based on where I think I am right now. That's what this is all about. There's no excuse anymore not to do this more frequently. I know nobody really likes to do it, but it's the lifeblood of your business. It's what your forecasts are and your WIP reporting, which is so critical to your lines of credit, your bonding capacity, and all those other things if you have to bond work. But it really goes to your overall profitability and be able to project your variances at this detail level. For example, if I wanted to see even in more detail what this, actual cost to date is, I can simply highlight the number and say, view transactions. And in this particular tool, because it's a relationally database tool, now I'm actually down into the actual payroll detail for this particular employee. So I can actually see what his cost was, how we got it. Did it come in from a mobile time card that somebody filled out on their iPad or their iPhone or their Android device? All of that information is available now to everybody in the company based on what you allow them to see. So this whole cost projection thing used to be a problem because a lot of systems wouldn't do it. You'd have to export it from QuickBooks or Sage. In some cases, some of the Viewpoint products, some of the other tools, you'd have to export this data to a spreadsheet, or you'd print it out on paper, and your project manager would have to sit down and update that. And all that goes away in this particular tool, and also in Spectrum. These tools are embedded in the software. So as long as your project managers are users and you allow them to do it, they can come in and put in their cost to complete, what they think the cost to complete is going to be, or what the cost at completion actually is. And any one of those numbers or percent complete will drive the other numbers. So it doesn't matter how your project manager forecasts. He can do percent complete, he can do cost of completion, and so on. It doesn't matter. And then the CFO or the owner or the senior project manager can be alerted when these tasks are finished. They can then review them, have a meeting with accounting, and then those numbers can immediately be brought right into the tools to project your WIP. It's all fully automated. It's not anything where you're going back and forth with multiple spreadsheets or paper copies. So that's just sort of an idea of some of the tools. We can spend a lot of time on that. We can talk about minimizing RFIs. Believe it or not, the typical project, construction commercial project, has 9.9 RFIs per $1 million worth of construction. That tells me somebody's not planning right. That tells me somebody's not meeting with their, other people on the job site. That tells me they didn't do the handoff right. 10 RFIs that take time and effort. Luckily, those RFIs are now automated. I can do them anywhere. I can do them in the field. I can do them in the office. I can track where those RFIs go. That is really important. Minimizing those and then minimizing your waste. I saw another number that gave me a heart attack. On the average job, there's somewhere between 8 and 22% waste on every job out of the total job amount. So why is that? I mean, somebody's dropping the ball. It could be inferior product. It could be poor methods. It could be shoddy workmanship. I don't know what it is, but that's really something else to grab a hold of. And then, really enforcing your daily field reporting is going to be your people's eyes in the field, letting everybody in the rest of the whole company know exactly what's going on. So there are plenty of tools. Procore has a great one. A Red Team has a great one. There are all kinds of tools. Actually, Spectrum, Viewpoint, and Acumatica all have their own project management tools, so they're all out there and available for your use. Okay, so then what? If we do all this right, we have the right profit velocity, then what should we do on the repeat stage? What we should do is we should make the last job you did your next postmortem, because I think it's really key that our subcontractors, our specialty contractors, our GCs, any of our customers, as I said earlier, they have a system based on best practices and standard procedures that they can do over and over again, that they can scale for their business, and that they can measure. Because if you can't repeat something, scale it, and measure it, then you're really kind of doing everything in kind of a, I guess lackadaisical is an easy word, but it's not maximizing the hard work that you put in, and it's not leveraging the tools. So let's do a postmortem after we've worked through these processes and look at those hard questions and see what we can do to really get to the team effort piece. At the end of the day, maximizing the profitability is a team effort. And it's always been that way. That's no different than it was in 1400. What is different now is if we can give all the members of the project team, including the back office, because really the project team is the whole company, right? I mean, the back office can reduce your risk, they can save you taxes, they can do all kinds of things where they earn their keep. But at the end of the day, if we're not making money on our projects, which means everybody in the company is on the project team, if we can all understand via having real-time data, we can understand the risk and reward, and then what? Then we have the opportunity to make more profit on our jobs. So just kind of in summary, so you kind of know what the landscape can look like now, there are tons of tools out there. And one of the things that we've tried to do, and there are others like us out there, we've tried to not be a one-trick pony. We try to have multiple products so that we can bring the best of breed solution to our customers with one caveat, and that caveat is they all need to be able to talk to each other in real time. Back in the day, we've all talked about integration. Integration could be copying files, you know, cutting and pasting. It can be importing, you know, CSV files. It can be importing an Excel spreadsheet. That's not the same thing as what I'm talking about, where you have a truly transparent exchange of data between products that may come from different vendors. That's the biggest difference that I've seen over the last probably 6 or 7 years, is that there are companies out there now that can do that, and they can all share via the cloud. So over here, you can have Sage Estimating, you can have WinEst, you can have ProEst. On the materials management side, you can have things like Workday and other materials management systems that also have labor components. You can have inventory control systems that change, where if you actually, maybe you're a subcontractor and you use materials and inventory that get transferred to a component system that's installed on a job. There are tools like Red Team and Procore. There are things like Workforce Go and ADP and, you know, Criterion for payroll. There's all kinds of financial management tools, and then there's service management components as well. So all of these are tools that if you have a service business and you service what you install, that you can add, and all of these tools can now talk to each other, you know, in a real-time fashion over the internet, using tools that your people already know how to use. No more teaching people to use how to computer, they know how to use their phone, and they can share that information wherever they are. So that's my sort of my thought today. I hope you've learned something. I hope it was valuable. And I know that Megan maybe has taken some questions. If not, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions offline. And we very much appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. Megan, any questions?
Yeah, so we do have, I have two actually. I'll go ahead and give you the first one. It says, I want to organize my business more, but it seems like all the software solutions will increase my cost and therefore decrease my profitability. How do I know if it's worth it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually have found that the old adage, plan your work and work your plan. If you really analyze what it is that you're doing in your current systems, I'm willing to bet the farm that it's costing you multiple times in, you know, redundant data entry, in, you know, in exchanging the same information verbally, you know, with people in your organization. You know, I can almost guarantee you that you're spending multiple times per month, you know, what you're doing now on what it would cost to get the appropriate systems. And that's one of the new models. Just so you know, back in the day when we first started, we would sell a perpetual license or a permanent license for the software, and you'd pay 20 to 25% maintenance every year. And you hoped that your vendor increased the value of the software by bringing additional functionality on. And, you know, unfortunately, that wasn't always the case. We saw that movie a couple of times. Now you can literally rent the software for a monthly fee, paid monthly. That's sort of the other sort of untruth about software. They always say, well, it's only going to be X dollars a month or X dollars per user per month, but they make you pay it for a year in advance. and still you end up having to pay maybe some type of maintenance. So I would say that you probably just need to get somebody who knows a little bit more about the landscape, that looks at your processes that you're doing manually, and then look at what the value, what the ROI or return on investment would be for that software. And then look at it like a monthly operating expense, and it makes it a lot easier to swallow that pill.
Awesome. One more just before we run out of time. Somebody's asked, what is the most important, or what are the most important data points that I need to know to ensure that I am forecasting accurately?
Well, that's also a great question. I think there are three numbers. I think the absolutely most important number, as we said earlier, is making sure that my estimated amount includes enough profit for me that if I don't make $1 more on that job, then I'm covered. So I would look at doing that postmortem and trying to determine those ideal jobs. You know, did I have enough float? Did I have enough additional money in reserve that I didn't have to use at the end of the job? That's where I would look first. But I think that in construction, it's pretty fundamental. Once you know what your estimate is, then the two other ways you can make money is to sell the job for more than what you think it's going to cost to do it, which is pretty obvious. And then commit costs via purchase orders to suppliers or subcontracts to subcontractors, so that if you estimate it's $1 million to do the job and you can sell it for $1,200,000, that when you're done with your buyout and the buyout's $900,000, that you want to be able to manage. I mean, it's really pretty simple at the end of the day. We're managing along and along to make sure that we're not spending too much on commitments, that we're not overspending our estimate, and that we are certainly not overspending our contract. So that's how I would answer that. It's pretty simple. There's lots of moving parts, but that's really what at the, when the game's over, those are the three numbers you manage to be successful.
Perfect. Well said, Pat. And with that being said, just in respect of everybody's time, we will go ahead and close it out. Like I said in the beginning, we are recording this, so we will send it and share it with everybody. Thank you to Pat. Thank you. This was a great presentation. Thank you to Vernon as well at ASA. And if you guys have any questions about ASA, the Georgia chapter, either ask us, ask Vernon. We are obviously members and we love it. And other than that, everyone have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.